Welcome to A Drinking Story. I'm Melissa Houston, and this is the podcast about when history was drunk and what they were drinking when they were. Sitting across from me is my partner in crime, Sam Houston. How you doing tonight?
Doing lovely. How we doing, Mel?
I am excited about this topic. I think I've been telling everybody about it because it's a slice of American history that most people don't think about through this lens.
Mm-hmm.
And alcohol played a bigger part in this piece of history than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, I mean, you think, knowing what it is already, that makes absolute sense. Because when you're out on a night on the town, you're going to have a few beverages. It's just going to happen, right? So what's the event, Mel?
So the topic is when drinking facilitated a presidential assassination. And for this one, we aren't looking at an era or a time period, but one night in history. April 14th, 1865, the night actor John Wilkes Booth murdered Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying alcohol killed Lincoln, but it played several crucial parts in history that night. So let's set the stage. I don't want to recap too much of the history because this is American History 101. You know who Booth was. You know who Lincoln was. I'm just going to fill in some of the little bits you may not know that's relevant to the story.
Yeah.
Because the American Civil War, it raged on for 4 years, which only 4 years. I do feel like I want to be petty and point out that the American Confederacy isn't even old enough for kindergarten. I have shoes that are 4 times the year of the American Confederate. What am I saying American Confederacy? I just the Confederate States.
You mean the losers?
Yeah. I don't know why I said American.
The ones who lost.
I'm hoping there's a global stage listening to this,
Right.
and so that's why I would specify it. The death toll. We're not talking just soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Between soldiers and civilians, between 1 million and 1.5 million people died because of the war.
Wow.
Either affected by it, disease, starvation.
Mm-hmm.
Soldier-wise, they estimate it to be about 750. But then when you start adding it on, and previous historians didn't count in the civilians. And then when they counted in the civilians, they didn't count in all the black people.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you add up all the numbers, it's a fucking tragedy over 4 years.
It really is. It's horrible.
And so it officially ends on April 9th, 1865. Now, in Washington, D.C. at that time period, for 4 straight years, the capital has been a nervous, high-strung, anxiety-ridden military city.
Right.
And then almost overnight, it turns into a drunken victory festival. It's what the newspapers called a jubilee.
Haha, love it.
Streets were filled with people drinking. You had random people kissing, soldiers celebrating, people climbing lampposts, waving flags, random spontaneous parades. They had illuminations at the patent office.
Mm-hmm.
They lit it up with 5,000 candles in celebration. It was a giant party across the city for about 3 days until we're going to get to the assassination. So, Sam, before we get into the event, what were they drinking during these Jubilee days?
What we need to keep in mind, and we're going to see this throughout each of the shows, there's always going to be classes and levels of what people drank due to the amount of money they made. I think it's good to set a parameter of kind of what people made as far as money went in that time frame.
Okay.
So your typical just unskilled laborer, right? Someone who helped move barrels off of docks and things like that, right? Like,
all right, yeah.
They made about $1.50 a day, $1.48 to $1.50 a day.
How far does that go in a bar?
We'll get into some prices, but you're talking like the cheapest stuff, like a beer or a cider would be like 5 cents, but something like brandy or whiskey could be 25 to 50 cents or a few dollars a bottle even.
Gotcha.
So that doesn't really... That's not what they can afford. So they're probably drinking beer and cider. Also, the devil's juice, as we will talk about multiple times throughout this show.
Yeah, that's going to be
multiple iterations.
Several episodes. Like, there's going to be different episodes on gin.
Gin was very cheap, so gin would have been anywhere from 5 to 10 cents a glass, put into drinks and stuff like that.
I'm purposefully saving gin for later because it's just too easy.
Allow me to say the following about gin for everyone listening to the show. Gin is crack. Gin is bigger than crack. Gin is insane.
Yeah.
So it's just very crazy. You're a skilled laborer, right? So someone like, say, like a carpenter or something like that, they could make anywhere from like $2 a day to upwards of like $6 a day.
Okay.
Now, your sophisticates and stuff like that are making, $10, $20 a day. So that's the person that can afford a $3 bottle of brandy from France or from Spain or Georgia or something like that. The locations, of course, would make it less or more. Whiskey would be like a cheaper whiskey would be 12 to 25 cents, but then an aged stuff could be like 35, 50 cents or a couple bucks for a bottle.
So a day's work is 6 whiskeys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't translate much to today because, well, I guess it depends on the whiskey you're drinking today, but I think your money goes a little bit further in the alcohol realm, although a nickel for a beer.
Yeah, nickel for a beer. Cider was also...
The beer prices have really risen exponentially compared to the rest of the liquors.
So other
for something we could make at home.
Yeah, exactly. Something you also have to keep in mind, too, is we are talking about Washington, D.C. Now, this is after wartime, right? But this is a city of means. This is a place where you can get ice easily. You can get sugar. You can get fresh citrus. So cocktails existed in these bars. People drank good French champagne. Brandy and fortified wines were really, really popular. So, like, as we know, our founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence over a glass of Madeira, right? So Madeira, sherry, cognac and Armagnac very specifically were very popular. And then, like I said, the kind of the cheaper alternatives would be Spanish brandy, or in the case of what we're drinking tonight is some Georgian brandy.
Right.
Yeah. So it really all kind of depended on your social status on what it was you drank, but there was something for everyone.
Okay. So no matter your price point, you had an option to get lit. Now, leading up to the events on the 14th, it is very pivotal to the week that on April 11th, Lincoln gives a speech from the White House. And the gist of it is that he's endorsing granting voting rights for Black people.
Oh, yeah, that sounds nice. Oh, no.
Let's not give too much credit. He's only advocating for limited Black suffrage. In his own words, I would myself prefer that it were now conferred on the very intelligent and those who serve our cause as soldiers.
That kind of sounds like modern day. I only want the good ones.
Yeah, pretty much. Which would be only about 2,500 people. And spoiler alert, despite the 15th Amendment in 1870, Black Americans did not have fully protected voting rights nationwide until 1965.
Well, these things take time, though. I can't even say that with a straight face.
Fucking 101 years.
101
after
years
Lincoln's assassination.
Yeah, 101 years. Terrible.
I'm doing math. Yes. Now, why this is pivotal is because one, Mr. John Wilkes Booth is in the audience. And his racist, bigoted ass was so incensed by the mere suggestion of equal rights that he said, quote, I'm not going to say what he said before I say this. That's for your own imagination. Well, not your imagination, but you know what I'm going to go at. He said, quote, ... by God, I'll put him through. That is the last speech he will ever make. Spoiler alert.
It was.
So John Booth. Very quick backstory on him, because again, this is American History 101. He came from Americans' most famous acting family at that time. I cannot stress that. Baldwins. Helmsworth? Oh, wait, they're Australian.
Yeah. That's why I said the Baldwins.
He was only 26 at his death. And apparently he was considered handsome, charismatic, and was addicted to the drama and the applause. We've been going back and forth on who to make the modern comparison to. And I've been doing some thinking on this, kind of going with the younger age. So and I don't want to suggest there's an actor out there that would do this, but imagine if it was like Robert Pattinson's not American, Tom Holland's not American. I'm trying to think of like that level. But those are the kind of men I'm talking about, like leading man, charismatic, heartthrob. Oh, I got it. Jonathan Groff.
Okay, I can get you.
Jonathan Groff. Imagine Jonathan Groff when we're talking about Booth. Well-known, well-liked, non-threatening, and had free reign backstage because everybody liked him and everybody trusted him.
Yeah, I mean, he is... People kind of just, he was an actor. And so I think some people in history kind of go, he was like a failed actor. And no. He was an accomplished fucking actor.
His brother and his father were far more famous than him. But again, we're talking like, not Tom, I can't think of any Americans in this comparison. I keep going Nicholas Hoult. Nope. Tom Holland. Nope.
Timothée Chalamet.
Andrew Garfield.
Okay.
Nope. He's not American either.
That's right,
Shit.
he's not.
I'm failing at an American comparison, or I just really like British theater. So that kind of gives you the idea.
Right.
Now, his more successful and famous older brother, Edwin, was an open Union supporter. However, John rallied for the Confederate cause, and his specific thing was raging over emancipation.
Okay.
Let me see if this sounds familiar, okay? His fear of equality caused him to destroy his family legacy.
Okay, so Alec Baldwin and Stephen Baldwin, because Alec Baldwin kind of like leans more left and Stephen Baldwin leans a little more right. And he kind of lost work in Hollywood just because he became a little difficult to work with and also way too opinionated for their liking.
Could be a good comparison. Now, as far as John Booth's drinking habits, and I just like calling him John Booth because the Wilkes, at this point, it's just too many fucking syllables. We're already wasting enough on this man. The man drank brandy, which is why we're drinking brandy tonight. A friend of his that owned a saloon that was connected to the National Theater would later recount that Booth was strictly a brandy drinker and he liked the finest imported liquors. The week of the assassination, apparently he was drinking about a quart of brandy in a sitting at the bar. He was drinking all over, but just at the bar, that's how much he was drinking at that one spot.
So he was getting blotto drunk.
Yeah, his friend said he knew that something was wrong and should have intervened, and maybe he could have stopped it. I don't know, because Booth had originally planned on kidnapping Lincoln, and then after April 11th, it turned into an assassination plot.
Wow. Now, so with brandy, there was a lot of ways you could drink it back then. You would naturally drink it neat. Ice was a luxury, right? So normally what ice would be used for is large format, and bars would make punch bowls because the ice would melt slowly and over time dilute the drink, right? You would use a lot of citrus and sugar, and then you would use secondary kind of liqueurs. So drinks that were very popular back then would have been like a brandy fizz or a brandy crusta, which is a sugar rimmed with lemon and then typically either dry curacao or maraschino liqueur, like a cherry liqueur mixed in with the brandy and lemon juice. And then it would have a peel, but that peel would be done in a circle inside the glass. And then there would be the sugar rim around it. So did he drink it neat? I don't know. Did he drink cocktails? I don't know. Did he drink, He would buy brandy by the bottle and would always travel with brandy. And again, because he was a famous wealthy actor, only the finest would do. Yeah, so he's probably drinking Armagnac and cognac for the most part. The only time his friend said that he didn't drink brandy was when he had theater obligations out west and brandy wasn't available, and so he drank the finest whiskeys. Okay. Well, we're going to talk whiskey in a little bit because that's prevalent to the D.C. market, Maryland, and Virginia area, too.
All right, so after all that backstory, which I said I would try to keep quick, which I think I kept it to 10 minutes.
I think you did.
Here we are, Washington, D.C., April 14, 1865. Now, one of the finest theaters in D.C. was owned by John Ford. That night, it's a show night. My American Cousin is on the stage, which meant the streets were bustling with carriages dropping off passengers, people coming and going. Next door to the theater, sharing a second floor walkway so you could go directly from the theater to the saloon, is the Star Saloon, owned by Peter Tractavol. We're just going to go Peter. Spanish, was a former musician turned saloon owner. And it was packed with patrons getting pre-theater drinks. And then later, once the show is going, the place is filled with coachmen, footmen, butlers, all passing the time while the play is going on.
Right. Very cool.
And before the day, actors are all filling the saloon. It was a popular spot for actors like John Booth to hang out at, either before a show, there to see a show, to catch up with people. That was
easy.
The spot.
Right.
When I worked at the Warner Theater, we had a little bar that was attached to it down below that everybody went to before drinks and after drinks, and it was the spot. There's still a couple bars by National Theater, and in DC, if you want to try to experience what it would have been like at the Star Saloon, go to the Old Ebbitt.
Oh, spot on. Big wood chandeliers, kind of backlit bar, tile floor. This would have been either tile or
Sawdust.
wood sawdust floor.
There still would have been sawdust floor 1860s, but your tile under the sawdust.
But yeah, that's what Old Ebbitt's a perfect example of what that place would have looked like.
And what would they have had at the Star Saloon that night?
Well, of course, we already kind of talked about the beer and the cider and the gin and all that good stuff. But I thought it would be kind of fun to kind of talk a little bit more about whiskey in that regards. So everybody knows bourbon, and bourbon was prevalent. But in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area, that was not the whiskey of choice. The whiskey of choice was actually rye, because corn was food. And particularly during the war, corn was food. Like, you weren't using it for making bourbon. Only Kentucky was really doing it, You used a little bit. You used essentially old corn to mix into your rye. But rye is what you made. Rye was a cover crop. It didn't really have any other purpose. So that's what Maryland, Pennsylvania, all of them would very typically make. So while there would be a lot of bourbon there, again, DC, city of means. They're going to have the opportunity to be able to have things brought to them, right? It's the capital of the United States. So
True.
That's going to happen. But rye is what's closer, and rye is what people drink. Rye, affectionately called the Baltimore paint remover.
I'd never heard that.
Yeah. And so there's two very different styles of rye. You have Maryland rye and you have Pennsylvania rye.
Okay.
Well, I like to compare it to the people, right? Maryland, Baltimore's the charm city, right? Nice and kind of friendly and approachable, right?
Sure.
And then PA, Philly. Need I say more?
I mean, it's brotherly love, but they have a funny way of love.
Right. So theirs
it's
was
a very pugilist town, Philadelphia.
Big and aggressive and bold type of whiskey.
Which, to be fair, that's always been Philadelphia's history. They've always been a very pugilist town.
So most of the rye whiskey in Pennsylvania was made out kind of more towards the western side, like out towards where Pittsburgh would be. Right?
Okay.
So when you think whiskey rebellion back in the post,
we're gonna get to that in the fall.
That would be rye whiskey.
Yep.
There it would be almost all rye, almost 100% rye, or something that's very popular nowadays that people love to find for source whiskey. We call it 95.5 in the biz. 95% rye, 5% malted barley. That's kind of the Mahanaliga Hills. I always fuck that word up, but that's the style.
Right.
But I want to turn the attention more towards Maryland. Right. And what Maryland rye is. And that's where also, along with our brandy, we're drinking some Maryland rye as well. And the Maryland rye we're drinking is out of Frederick, Maryland, called McClintock. And they make that very traditional Maryland style rye, which was 51% rye and the rest was barley or corn. A lot, so it would be a little bit sweeter, a little bit more approachable. Also, how it would be made was very different. We'll talk about different distillation types, but most of your whiskey is pot stilled. Maryland rye was almost always column stilled, which also makes it a little bit lighter and a little bit thinner, right? So that was very much the liquor du jour. And in DC around this time, and particularly like when you said Wilkes Booth, when he was on the West Coast, would drink whiskey, Maryland rye is probably what he was drinking.
I've got a fun TV trivia. Deadwood.
Yes.
In one of the saloons in Deadwood, they have some advertisements on the back, and there is a Maryland rye whiskey advertisement because that was a whiskey drank in the West.
Yep. Not surprised by that at all. Right. Prior to Prohibition, Maryland was the largest whiskey making market in the entire country. So like,
let's do an episode about that.
Yeah. Old Overholt, Pikesville, brands you've heard of today that are now made in Kentucky used to be Maryland ryes.
We'll get into that.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right. So here we are back to April 14th. I'm not going to go through the day of. John Booth was spending his days doing things like setting up an escape plan, drilling a peephole into the door of the presidential box. He had a to-do list.
Drinking a quart of brandy.
Hopping down to the Star Saloon for a drink to kill time while he waits. And I don't want to read too far ahead, but that night he didn't drink brandy.
Okay.
But we'll get to that in a moment. Lincoln that day had meetings and, stuff to do. The play begins at 8:30 p.m. Lincoln's party doesn't arrive to the theater until about 9 p.m. And there is one D.C. cop assigned to protect him, John Frederick Parker. All right, time out. Because Parker deserves a little backstory because he is a lesson in enabled incompetence.
Okay.
He was one of the Capitol's first officers when the police force was organized in 1861, and Parker's record as a cop fell somewhere between pathetic and comical. He was known for, quote, conduct unbecoming an officer, a.k.a. being drunk on duty, sleeping on the job, and routinely visiting brothels. On the assassination night, he was already 3 hours late for work. I don't want to get too much more into Parker after the assassination, but he's not going to get fired for this. He is going to get promoted and is still going to hold a job for another couple of years.
Right. Well, because federal law enforcement is always really competent. Really competent.
Enabled incompetence.
Yep.
All right. So the play stops for Lincoln's entrance. They play Hail to the Chief. He, Mary Todd take their seats for the last part of Act 1 of a 3-act play. Now, the bodyguard, Parker, he puts himself outside the presidential box in the passageway besides the door. But, Sam, from where he sat, he couldn't see the play.
Aww.
So after Lincoln and his guests settled in, he moved to the first gallery to watch it from the back. Later, I guess he got bored, and after intermission, he leaves his post, joins the footman and the coachman of Lincoln's carriage for drinks in the Star Saloon, and that's where he spends the rest of his night.
Thought his job was to guard fuck president.
Yeah. So a very thirsty, alcohol-deprived DC cop could be one of the reasons why Lincoln was assassinated that night.
And also just government incompetence that they only had one guy.
One guy.
Why wasn't there 2 or 3?
And there had been threats on him. Grant, people had begged him not to go out because there were people out there threatening him, but he was in a state of euphoria. And it had been such a depressing time in the city that he wanted to go out.
Right.
Now, during the first 2 acts of the play, Booth is going between backstage, back of the house, and is reinforcing himself with drinks at the Star Saloon.
A little liquid courage.
This is very important. And this is something that I will pat myself on the back on, because looking at history through the lens of alcohol, that night, John Wilkes Booth was not drinking brandy, and they definitely had brandy in the bar.
Of course that bar was
because they're going to feed Lincoln brandy as he's dying to like ease him. And it came from the Star Saloon. So I know they had brandy.
Right.
He's drinking whiskey. Now, I don't know if it was Maryland or Pennsylvania, one of the two.
It's either bourbon or it's Maryland rye is probably what he's drinking.
He's drinking whiskey.
Right.
And most historians probably don't wonder why. And I have a theory.
Okay.
He only drank whiskey when he was out in the West. He was obsessed with cowboy stories. I think since John was up to do some pew-pew outlaw shit, he needed some whiskey. And being the dramatic fuck he was, well, if he's going to do some cowboy shit, he better drink some cowboy alcohol. And I think that's why Booth drank whiskey the night he killed Lincoln.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah.
It fits the character,
You're
the
gonna be a
persona.
cowboy and do cowboy shit. And of course, he's a thespian, so he's going to be in character.
Right?
He's about to make it all about himself.
Right?
So, yeah, of course. And of course, he would probably like drink the whiskey, hoping that like the bartender would be like, whiskey tonight. He's like, yeah, it's a man's drink. It's a stoic drink.
Oh, yeah. And Peter was
drink for
certain.
important times.
Peter was certain it was whiskey, and he said it was odd, but it was whiskey.
Oh, I guarantee you it was. He wanted to make it all about himself.
I found that detail to be fascinating. Now, was it Killing Lincoln and a few other depictions? They have John Parker and Booth in the Star Saloon at the same time.
Okay.
I don't know.
I mean,
Maybe. Here's the timing we do know. I know for a fact John Parker did not go down to the bar until 9:30 p.m. And I know for a fact John Booth was in the back of the theater at 10:05 p.m.
Okay.
There is a chance, but my argument against it is I don't think Booth would have been in the crowded bar for intermission, more people to distract him, and he's a man on a mission.
Yeah, he probably also easier to hide out with the actors backstage or back of house.
He had a horse behind you to check in on. He had pacing to do. He was all over the place. Now, the reason we know he was there at 10:05 is because every time he returned, he asked Ford's employee, John Buckingham, what time it was. And John remembers clearly that the gas lights were down for Act 3. In the lobby, Booth once again asks him what time it was. And he pointed him to the clock, 10:05. Booth gets to the unguarded box about 10:07, right after Act 3 starts, maybe 10:10.
Okay.
Now, John Booth, filled with whiskey and bravado, has planned this out to the specific comedic line.
No shit. Because he's a fucking actor. Because he's a pretentious fucking actor. Of course he did.
The biggest laugh in the play, which was delivered by actor Harry Hawk. And here's the line. Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I ought to know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You suck, dazzling old man trap. I love that, suck, dazzling, meaning scheming. And apparently the audience erupts in laughter. Just then, pew, pew, and Booth fires the shot. Within seconds, Lincoln's lopped over. Harry that's in the booth with him is stabbed. Booth jumps off the thing. There is dispute on what he said next. It doesn't matter. But within seconds, a young Army surgeon named Dr. Charles Leal has climbed into the presidential box, and he realizes something critical, that Lincoln can't be moved far. The bullet has entered behind the ear and is lodged deep behind the brain, and any jostling could kill him. Where's the closest place to take him?
The saloon.
The Star Saloon.
Right there.
To which Peter went, absolutely not. We are not having a president of the United States dying in my bar.
Right.
So he ended up going across the street to the boarding house.
Okay.
Okay, I want to be a little bit fair here. I'm blaming this on John Parker leaving his position. But I do want to point out that even if he had been in his post, it's not certain he would have stopped Booth. He probably would have let him go right on in. Lincoln had seen Booth perform before. John was that famous that he probably just would have waved. That's why I made the Jonathan Groff comparison.
Right. He would have said, hey, can I go say hello? I want to go say hello to the president.
It's like being a well-known actor being waved backstage at a Broadway show because everybody knows him. And then that familiarity becomes the security breach.
Right. Now, you said he jumped off the balcony. Is that when, because wasn't it he like broke his ankle and stuff like that? And what did he do it from jumping
broke
off
his leg, tripped on the bunting, breaks his leg, and ends up heading to Southern Maryland. And that's a whole nother story for another day.
Yeah, of course.
Now, there is one other way alcohol played a very key part in April 14th.
Okay.
And that is the lesser known plot to murder Vice President Andrew Johnson.
Okay.
It was actually a three-way plot. There was another guy that was going to kill Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Stewart. I don't know. Not important because there's no alcohol involved in that one. But Azardot was so nervous and worried about killing Johnson, and he just didn't have the cojones, the gumption. He tried to drink his courage. All day, he tried to drink his courage. He did end up buying a gun, ended up back at the hotel bar, continuing to drink his courage, spent the rest of the night, obviously didn't go after Johnson, drunkenly walking in the streets of Washington, drops his knife in a nearby gutter. A sharp-eyed woman saw this, reported to the police immediately, and even though he didn't do anything, he still executed on the conspiracy to assassinate the president.
Wow.
So there you go. That's my story.
I love it. Like, people should kind of go. Yeah, obviously, there's plenty of books and stuff like that, but I think podcasts that, like, I think it was last podcast on the left had done a whole thing about Wilkes Booth.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you need to understand what a self-absorbed, righteous fucking asshole this guy was.
Yeah.
Like,
but it's just the drinking the quart of brandy every night leading up to it because he was conflicted or trying to figure out the plans, or just a fucking drama queen up in his own feels about black people getting rights, to planning of the kidnapping assassination in Surratt's Tavern and Surratt's boarding house, to the bodyguard and the assassin being in the same bar that night, the bodyguard leaving his post for a drink, the assassin switching up his drink, and then his co-conspirator getting too drunk to act.
And government incompetence.
Yep.
Shocker.
And that is how alcohol affected that night of history.
Very cool.
Well, I hope you all are enjoying our little drinking stories. If you are, please hit that follow button. Recommend us to a friend. Drink responsibly, safely, leave a good review. If they want to find or follow us, Houston, how do they find you?
Me on the Tiki Talks DU football show. That's my soccer podcast. Drink a ton of alcohol and say the F word a lot and talk about footy. But that's a great place to find me because always putting up stuff there. So, or just questions in general. DM me. Let me know.
You have an Instagram?
Right now it is Whiskey Sam is my Instagram. I'm going to be soon changing that to reflect my business.
Right. Well, this is April.
Yeah. SDH Beverage Solutions.
Spoiler alert. We're recording this in the past. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Tales from the Tour Guide. And if you're ever in Annapolis, well, come check out Annapolis Ghost Tours. We do history tours, ghost tours, pirate tours, and all sorts of haunted pub crawls and drunk storytelling.
They're kind of fantastic.
Yep. See you next time, everyone. Cheers.